where Descartes tries to justify um, a possible connection between mind and spirit, between the material and the immaterial, because obviously he wanted to justify his belief in God, his Christianity. That's what that's all that meditation is about. It's about him justifying his irrational belief on some supernatural being. But yeah, I mean, that's what it is. It's an irrational belief in something that you cannot justify. So using logic, hiding behind syllogisms that are sheltered on a false premise, as most philosophers do, so-called philosophers, is nothing new. Lucretius, subverting already the practice of philosophy through this poem that inspired Virgil to write his Georgics and further on to do his Aeneid, and that stands through pages and pages. That is not an epic that is concerned with the actual world and with explaining nature. It goes far beyond that. He's materialist. He doesn't. He believes in matter, and he believes that matter goes and comes and doesn't disappear. He has many. He tries to explain everything. He really tries to get to the nature of things, and he's doing a genuine effort, perhaps because he is dogmatically devoted to Epicurean philosophy. I don't think so. His reasoning is so sharp and so beautiful. Even in the Rhyming for Teeners that Steve criticizes, I didn't have that big of a problem with the way that the verse is, the way it's sort of like translated. Perhaps it's because my aesthetic, analytic eye, my taste when it comes to English poetry is far less sharp than when I read in Romance languages, when I read in Spanish, Portuguese, Galician, or hopefully soon Latin. So it's maybe easier for me to be satisfied with less, and I only recently have I started to read poetry in English and focus more on the execution than the content. I had always been, since I learned, whenever I learn a new language, I always focus on the content more, because I don't yet have the eye to truly savor not only the rhetoric, but because rhetoric is the thing that I actually have mastered, but the verse. I don't know what would be the word for this, but the capacity to do linguistic acrobacies with a language, and yeah, that's there for me. I definitely enjoy that aspect of the book, but also again, the actually philosophy behind the claims, the reasoning follows from having so little information, having being trying to grasp this single conviction that he has about everything being made of matter being made of particles. Therefore, I don't know why thunder. Why does thunder arrive to us later than lightning? Why do we hear it before we see it? Well, because the particles that travel to your ears are slower than the particles of light that travel to your eyes. That is incredibly close to the truth. That is pretty much it, said by somebody who's just not aware of the posterior scientific tradition that explained that differently, but that pretty much arrives at the same conclusion. Tries to explain clouds. He makes strange claims about lust and how to thrust a wife, although a wife should never it's just it's all over the place. It's in a good way. It's everywhere. And of course, there's a lot of stupid claims, a lot of things that he says that are just, I feel like they are more lyrical licenses. I thought of doing with this book what I did with Adorno and with Hegel, and actually go analyzing book by book, page by page, the philosophical arguments. But I feel like it would be a deserve because it's a poem. I recommend, as always, I always recommend Gregory D. Sadler, Gregory Sadler. You will find him. He's I think the most important channel in YouTube in English, of course, support your reading of philosophical texts. And he has on book 3 of Lucretius, he has a series of videos analyzing book 3, the philosophy behind it. It's very didactic in a good way as well. I think didactic in English has a more negative connotation. In Spanish is actually good. It means educational, nothing else. I recommend that if you are interested in looking into this book further as you read it, that you definitely go to his channel and check it out, because it's an amazing channel, and it's helped me a lot in the past when I was reading Heidegger. What else? But when I see him analyzing the poetry, and he's like, maybe he finds it funny that Lucretius, in the middle of two philosophical claims, says something like the lion is sort of like the lion's action is discouraged by his roar, or something like that. I don't remember exactly how it is, but it's like the problem with philosophy is that it takes things literally. In poetry, you cannot take things literally, and that's why I also find it funny, not funny, but it confused me when Steve said, in talking about this book, that a lot more people reads the Lucretius, The Nature of Things, than Epicurus, because Lucretius wrote in an engaging manner, right? And it's like, maybe in the past, I know a lot more people who read Epicurus, starting with my own father or myself, that hasn't read Lucretius, The Nature of Things, or doesn't even know about it. I know a lot more people who nowadays truly reads the philosophical classics than the poetry classics. Most people who is into poetry today is only really into 21st century poetry, unfortunately. But I think that is because before, I feel like people who read, they were readers, and they were kind of like, I imagine we are in this community, in the sense that they actually engaged with the text, and they wanted to read everything that could get into their hands, whatever the field that they were interested on was. But today, I feel like, as I said before, I think I said it before, our relationship toward the books we read is, as a society, is a lot more superficial, and it's much harder for people to I think people has completely lost the skill of reading into the sentences, reading into the text that they are in fact reading, or at least pretending to read. And poetry requires that. Poetry requires analysis. A true, not only understanding but enjoyment of poetry requires analysis, because poetry is all metaphor and stylistic resources, and anaphora and alliteration, but also is a lot of I will not say I take how you say this, the not pencil, the straw. Oh, this is for a poet. You don't need to know what this is, because you will never call it by its name. You will call it something else, and you will refer to it in a different way, and you will probably evocate the action more than the object. That in poetry can be a better way to grasp the phenomenological reality of what that is. You can get better at what headphones are by talking about the sensations that they evoke, or the person who wore them, if you're writing a poem about that person, than by saying the word headphones and describing scientifically the technological processes that make it create sound. And because of that, because there is already a reading on that sense of anything, a plane with reality that sort of seems to be saying something else, but in reality it is trying to see it with different eyes, that I think reading poetry is harder than reading philosophy. A good philosophy should be incredibly simple, should be incredibly easy to read, because good philosophy should be accessible to everybody. That's why obscure philosophy, which is what we have for the last, I don't know how many 100 years, but especially the last 2 centuries, 2-3 centuries, it's against philosophy. I think philosophy should be inclusive. It should, because unless we want to fall prey of the many critics, especially by people like Hannah Arendt, who was herself a philosopher but would never call herself a philosopher, because philosophers they don't really want to change the realities that they discover. They just want to question them. I think questioning can create change, but the point is that conversation should be proactive, and for people to be involved in that conversation, you should be accessible. I think that, I don't think that Hegel being difficult, or Heidegger being difficult, or Kant being difficult, or even Spinoza being difficult, or even Aristotle being difficult, although Aristotle can excuse himself because what we have of him is not all that he wrote, and it's fragmented, and that makes some of his texts more than others harder to follow or to read. But I don't think that them being difficult is in any way speaks well in any way about them as writers. I think it is a defect, it's a fault, and it makes them worse at what they are trying to do. A good philosopher should be easy to read, even if they are talking about a difficult subject. While with poetry, it's not so much the case. That's it. I've never found myself reading a philosophical text and overseeing something, but it happens to me with poetry, especially with best poems, often that I read a poem and I'm like, well, that's good, and then 3 weeks after I'm like, what the fuck, that was so good, I need to find that poem again. I just realized of something about a poem, and then I go to it and I go verse by verse, and I look at the extraction, I look at everything, every device that the poem has to communicate with me. And it's saying so much that I couldn't see, because a poem is playful and it plays with shadows in a way that philosophy should not, unless it's trying to do something else. But insofar as you're trying to make insofar as you're focusing on content instead of form, because poetry and lyric and literature focus more on the form, philosophy focuses more on the content, just like science. You should try to make that content clear. You should try to make that content easy to interpret, so that when somebody tells you that you said something, you actually can respond to them, yes I did, or no I didn't. And with poetry, if people doesn't know, or if there is many ways of reading a poem, that's even better in some ways. Although I'm not saying that poetry cannot be clear. Poetry can be incredibly clear. In fact, I've been transcribing a poet that I've been reconciling myself with, and that I have come to believe is one of the best poets of the Spanish language that have ever been, and it's no polemic thing to say, it is Quevedo, Francisco de Quevedo. I used to, as a teenager, like more Góngora for some reason. Góngora is very good, but Quevedo is an amazing poet. And I have my poetry Bible, and I've been transcribing his poems constantly. I've been doing this for the last few days. That's also something that has kept me absent from recording or from doing anything else. And I have with this poem, I have a question comes to mind. How do I transcribe my favorite poems, the poems that I believe they should be on my poetry Bible, when they are such long poems? I had this question when I started transcribing the Odyssey. So yeah, should I get a fragment that I consider representative of the whole, or wouldn't that be a disservice? I don't know. I feel like having a fragment. Every poem I've transcribed into my, I think every poem that I've transcribed into my poetry Bible was from beginning to end. But I don't think I'm not going to transcribe however 100 pages Lucretius' The Nature of Things is. And I'm also not going to transcribe the Odyssey or the Aeneid whenever I read it. But it definitely deserves it. I was also looking, and there is no translations of The Nature of Things into Spanish since the 70s or something like that. There's one translation to Spanish that I know of this. I read it in the English translation, the same one that Steve was recommending and this recommending at the same time, from Penguin. But there's no recent translations to Spanish. That makes me think, perhaps if I learn Latin quickly enough, I can try to make my own translation, which could be a very nice adventure. Problem, I have many other things going on at the moment, and I'm already a bit insecure about my capacity to learn Latin on the side of everything else that I'm doing. You will know about these things that I'm doing as they happen, because they will probably influence my background and many other things, but not now. Not now. I don't like talking about things that haven't yet happened. These are the books that I have been reading, okay? When listening, Hiroshima. The other one, reading, Lucretius, The Nature of Things, definitely one of my favorites. I will make a video about my favorite books, probably toward the end of the year. Favorite books of all time. I mean, I feel like I owe you that one, since I have been delighted by seeing so many videos from so many booktubers doing that. But before that, definitely I will finish this and talk about it. And I will also talk about this wonder that I've just started, Blindside by Peter Watts. An incredible book so far. We'll see. I also have to finish The Age of Reason by Thomas Paine, which I started as well, and it's also seems to be amazing, an amazing book. And who knows, a lot more. So I don't want to speak more than I wanna be able to pull my own weight. So I don't want to say anything else, just in case then I fail to provide. So yeah, that's it. I hope you're good, booktube, and everybody here. Let me know if you've read any of these two books and what you thought about it, or any of the other two, or you have a favorite poet that you've been transcribing. If you transcribe poems, tell me about that. Do you think philosophy is harder than poetry? Do you think poetry is harder than philosophy? Am I alone in thinking that poetry is, in fact, especially for our generation, which reads less and less and less and less, not proportionally, not quantifiably, but in the sense that, like, in numbers there is more readers today than have ever been, but percentually, in terms of the population, less and less people of our society reads poetry and reads books in general than ever. So I don't know, to my friends who say that we are living a new renaissance, I'm like, no, perhaps you live in the right district, in the right town to think that, but most people don't read anywhere. Most people are incredibly ignorant, and they do also not live by Epicurean values, like Steve also claims. I, of course, always love contradicting my booktube friends, and I will continue to do so in the next video. But this is it for today. Hiroshima, highly recommended. Lucretius, must read. The Nature of Things. Have a nice day. I'll see you on the other side.